All right, guys, welcome back. Got another episode, and I'm excited for this one. We've talked about it, this topic on our own a couple times, and I find it fascinating, especially in the world that we live in. Talk about sex trafficking. We've talked about just like pedophilia. We've talked about all the taboo topics, really, and that nobody really wants to talk about, but so important. And it's cool because we get to have you on the show where you guys have real life experiences, and then very pretty extreme experiences with like Marlon, your dad, and we'll kind of get into that a little bit on the show. And so excited to have you guys on. I think this will provide a lot of value for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think so.
Hopefully,
to be here.
Should.
Yeah. So, and it like as we were talking before, like one of the latest shows that we've had, or it's a little late at night, but like because we both have kids, but we're excited to be here. Hopefully, we can bring the energy and be able to help a lot of people in this episode. But let's just kick it off. Yeah. So, Cherish, I'm going to start with you a little bit, if that's cool. So maybe just if you can explain your experience. I know as a child you had been sexually abused by a family member?
No, a neighbor.
Tell us about
it. I don't remember my exact age. And to be honest, when it happened, I didn't really know. Like, I didn't know what happened. I just knew that it didn't feel right. That's the best way to explain it. So, I was outside, and as I remember it, I went to go throw something away in our like trash can that was pulled out to the road, and it was next to our neighbors. And one of their teenage boys was out, and they had, I think, 4 kids, 2 girls, 2 boys. And the girls babysat us. Like, we were around a lot. They were all older. And he was outside, and he was like, hey, do you want to play a game? And I was like, yeah, like what? And he was like,
how old is the neighbor?
I think he was like 14 at the time.
Okay. If
I remember correctly. And so, do you want to play a game with me? And I was like, what game? And he was like, yeah, just a game in my backyard. And I was like what? Like Monopoly? Like, I'm little, Yeah. I think I was probably 6 or 7. Wow. And he was like, yeah. So just the innocent little girl me that we knew these people and trusted them went in the backyard, and obviously things escalated from there. He had me touch him and do things to him that were really inappropriate. And I knew in my head, like, this isn't right. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, we don't, and I don't know that my parents really talked to us about it. I don't remember that or recall, but like, I think we know, like, someone touching us isn't right.
Yeah. Like, warning signs were just going off.
Yeah. And I remember thinking that, and he, I don't know how graphic we want to get, but he had me do really inappropriate things and tried to do inappropriate things with me as well. And so at one point,
this is just outside
in his backyard,
in the open, anybody could have walked.
So it was kind of to the side of their house. Like, there's they had just like weeds in the backyard. So it wasn't like right where they're like back, like out the living room. It was like out the garage door. So kind of on the side of their backyard, Yeah. And there was like a little patio, just like a little square of concrete. And that's where it was. We were just sitting on the ground. And at one point, his brother came out looking for him. And I still...
Younger brother?
Older brother.
Okay.
He's the oldest in their family. I still remember like the look on his face, because it was like he knew something wasn't right, but instead he just closed the door. Like, and it's like he was probably 16 or 17.
Sure.
So he definitely should have known something wasn't right there. You know what I mean? And been like, what's going on?
Yeah.
But he didn't. And I don't remember like how long it went on for. I do remember details, like very
You're
detailed.
6. Like, I don't remember anything at 6 really that I can think of. That's young.
Yeah.
But it was traumatic enough for you
that I remember. Yeah.
And the reason I asked that question, Cherish, is because like people listening to this, a lot of them have kids.
Yeah.
And I have a 6-year-old, right? And you guys have one close. Yeah. So you start thinking about that. The reason I asked that is like, you're in the backyard. Like, how many times are my kids out running around with the neighbors? Like, our neighborhood is constantly going. Yeah. And the kids are out riding their bikes and they're doing stuff. Like, how are you going to catch that? You know what I mean? Like, how do you? And so you hid it for a long time, right? You didn't say anything for a while.
Yeah. So I came home, and when I was coming home, my brother was outside. He's older than me. And so I had, I'm trying to remember. So my mom was, just to kind of give background, my mom was married, had my 2 older brothers and me, and then went through a really nasty divorce. My dad was abusive. And anyway, he was in prison. And my mom got remarried, had a baby that was really short, and then got remarried again a couple of years later. And then she's been married ever since. And he's adopted us. He had kids too. So I don't remember. I do think that they were married at that point. Anyway, that's relevant later in the story. So I was walking home, and my brother, just a little bit older than me, who actually has special needs, was outside. And he was like, I don't remember exactly what he asked me, but I remember him being like, oh, did you play a game with the neighbor? So. And I was like, did you? Yeah. Because that is like, I knew it wasn't right. So when my brother said that he played, that he said yes. And I was like, just chills, like I'm like, wait, he did it to him too. That like really bothered me and sat wrong with me. Or didn't sit right with me, I guess I should say. So anyway, I don't remember much after that, and I don't know how long, like I said, I don't remember the exact age, but I think it was in 3rd or 4th grade. So it was probably a year or two later. We had like abuse week at school. Yeah. I don't know if they still do this, but there was like one day dedicated to every type of abuse, and they would like teach you about it. So there was like physical abuse, and we watched videos and they talked about it. And, if that's happening at your home, what to do and who to talk to, and mental or emotional, all of them. And obviously one of them was sexual abuse. So I remember sitting in class watching a video about it, and I just started crying. And so my teacher kind of like came over and was like, are you okay? I remember it so vividly. And I was like, yeah, I'm okay. And she's like, do you need to talk? And I was like, no. So that's all I really remember from that. But I think that's when it really registered to me exactly what had happened, and that it was what had happened. Yeah. Because I knew something wasn't right, but I didn't know what. And deep down, I felt like I was going to get in trouble. Right. And I think this is where a lot of, especially kids or teenagers, or anyone, you feel shame.
This is common, right? Like right. Epstein's Island, like the show on Netflix.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe it when I watched that, how many girls went over to his house and constantly wouldn't tell anyone. I'm like, how could somebody get away with that over and over and over? Like, there has to be something in women that makes them feel like I did something wrong. I'm going to be in trouble. And I can
especially see that as like a teenager or something, right? Like you're like, oh no, I wore short shorts or something. But as a little kid, I just was like, my parents are going to be really mad at me.
So is that the thing? Do women feel like, well, if I'm showing any of my body, that I was the one that turned him on?
I do think that there's a culture that like, yeah, if you were wearing promiscuous clothing, it's your fault, which I disagree with 100% because I think men are in charge of themselves. Anyone, not just
Is
men,
that a world culture, a United States? Is it a Utah culture?
I don't know. It's interesting to me. There is a stigma around that, but I think not just men. I don't want to, that people are in control of their own, emotions or whatever. So anyway, so I thought on that for a long time because I was like, I know I should tell my parents because it said you should talk to a trusted adult, but I was really worried about getting in trouble.
Yeah.
But I just, that feeling when like something's wrong and it just like kind of eats at you.
Yeah. Doesn't go away.
Mm-hmm. It just kept eating at me. And so I remember one Sunday we were laying in my parents' bed watching a show. And it was like just my parents and maybe me and my little brother watching a movie, and my parents had fallen asleep, like Sunday nap. And it was just making me sick, like just that gut feeling. And I just kept being like, you need to tell them. But I couldn't get myself to say it. And they had fallen asleep, but I just kept, it was eating me. So I went in the bathroom and I got a piece of toilet paper and I tore it. Like, you tell them not. You tell them, like a flower.
Yeah.
Kind of getting emotional, and I landed on you tell them. And then I was like, no, I'm not going to tell them. I'm too scared I'm going to get in trouble. But what really ate at me was my brother, because I knew he didn't know that it wasn't right. Do you know what I mean? Because he's special needs. So I went back to my parents' bed and I kind of laid there, and then I just like blurted it out. Like, just like, so-and-so sexually abused me. And my mom was like, what? Kind of like half asleep. She's like, what did you say? And I said it again, and she like woke up my dad. She's like, Kirk, did you hear that? What? Kind of don't remember much after that. Like, I remember them asking more details, and then I remember that they were going to go talk to them, and I like freaked out. Like, no, I don't want you to go talk to their parents. I don't want you to do that. And I know they did at some point go over and talk with his parents, but I don't know really what happened after that.
Yeah. Crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting story. I mean, it's so many pieces of that. So, having gone through that, like, and Marlon, we're going to get to yours too, I promise, because yours is an interesting story too. But
yeah, it does. It all
does. How do you teach your kids? Like, what have you learned from that to be able to teach your kids?
Well, I don't know the right words for this, but I feel like it was a lesson for me, because growing up, I was really protective of my body. And that's why. So just for example, in like high school and college, if guys wanted to like mess around or try and put their hand up my shirt, I was like a hard no, like no. And I did usually tell people that I was like dating or close friends. And I remember when we were dating and kind of getting serious, I told him about it, and he kind of was like, okay. And then he sat me down one night and was like, I need to know what happened, like everything, because we're going to be getting married and being intimate. And up until that point, I don't want to say it hadn't affected me, because it totally did. But obviously that was a whole new level of, like,
yeah.
And so he made me tell him like every detail. And I just remember you got like emotional listening to it.
Yeah.
And just to rewind a little bit, I knew his dad. So in elementary school, his dad was one of my teachers, and I was in his dad's choir at school, the same school where I had that lesson about sexual abuse. And anyway, so as a mom, I mean, Marlon knows this, but I've always been very protective of my kids and who I let them around. But more than anything, and what I've learned from it, is the best thing you can do, you can't live in fear. Like, you just can't live your life in fear that, like you said, your kids are out running around your neighborhood, and you could just keep them home all day, and then they won't experience anything.
Yeah.
And there's a good chance there's probably someone living in your neighborhood that may or may not do that to kids. That's just the statistics, right? So I've learned the best thing you can do is educate your kids. Educate your kids on their body. Educate your kids on if people want to see their privates, and how to respond to those things. And we've talked to her, like our 7-year-old, for example, about it since he was probably 2.
Yeah, as soon as he could understand, I think.
Yeah, like
we've always used the proper names.
Yeah, that's
penis,
really important.
Vagina.
Yeah, and
they don't know any different, because to them it's just that's what it is.
Yeah.
For some reason, adults I think it's like
taboo
and weird to say
it
those
what
words.
It is. A penis is a
It's
penis.
like our parents, it was taboo for them.
Right.
So they taught our parents that.
Yeah.
And then they get trickled down, and now at our stage, it's like,
yeah, no,
it just is.
That's a big thing.
Mean, we had, so one of our good friends, I think, didn't he like pull his pants down and show?
Yeah, we had a friend show our little boy.
He was just being a little kid and
They
just
think
being
it's
funny.
Yeah.
Right.
But
he immediately came to me and was like, Mom told me what happened. And I was so proud, because I'm like,
yeah,
I feel like that's a great moment he could have been, or a moment where he could have been like, I don't want to tell my mom, we'll get in trouble.
Yeah.
And so I just was like, okay. And I asked the friend, and the friend kind of didn't want to tell me, but he said he did. And so I was like, okay, well, that's inappropriate, so you need to go home. And we dealt with it with the parents, and it was fine.
Yeah.
And a lot of times I do think it's innocent with little kids, but proper terms is a big one. Like, these were just things I was really hardcore about, I guess, from the beginning, teaching our kids about our bodies, no sleepovers. If you have a weird feeling about people, but like I said, more than anything, teaching that's the best thing you can do. You can't control everything that goes on in their life, but you can teach them what to look out for. And stuff.
I love that. And just being able to help create a safe space where they can come and talk, and you're not going to get mad. And I think that's the hardest thing. Growing up as a kid, there were times where my parents did a great job with that. There was times where they maybe didn't. And definitely the times that they didn't, it made me feel less likely to go and talk to them about something else.
Yeah.
Yep. And I'm not saying, I think my parents are awesome, and I think they did the best that they could. and that their parents taught them whatever, but there were things that were taboo.
It was not talked about.
It wasn't. And I didn't know
stuff was not talked about.
anything. I didn't know how to create babies. I didn't know about I never had a birds and the bees talk. I didn't know what pornography was. I didn't know any of these things. I mean, it was just a whole nother world I had to figure out.
It's kind of weird when you think about it, because like the truth is we all have private parts and we all get married and we're all going to have sex, but like no one talks about it.
Yeah.
You know? And so
I hate hearing the stories of like, and these are real stories, and I think they're like such a minority, but like where they think that sex is done through the belly button, or like just like the craziest stuff.
But if you don't know,
then how are you? I
still
know?
don't.
But that it's that taboo.
Yeah.
Is my point.
Yeah,
it shouldn't be, right?
Yeah.
You should just talk about it in an appropriate way, so that they don't. One, when they hear about it, they don't wander, and then two, it's like, well, if you don't create that safe space, their friends are going to tell them. And they're not going to teach them
somewhere, and you better you
want to teach them the right way.
Yeah.
So that when it goes off, then they can. I love and trust and respect my mom and dad, and they told me this, and so it just kind of brings that, like, just kind of gives them stability.
I will say it's cool because now our 7-year-old is starting to get into that phase where he comes home and is obviously learning lots of things, and it's almost daily that he asks us things. And even just before we came over, like we had a conversation with him that I would say maybe most parents would feel like.
What was it about?
So we were watching,
periods.
Well, because we were watching The Chosen.
Yeah.
And the episode of the woman with the issue of blood, right?
Oh yeah.
And I don't even know why he brought it up, but he brought it up.
This is like a common thing.
And it was just like, well, yeah. So I told him about periods. I'm like, she's bleeding out of her vagina, and he's just like, what?
Yeah.
But I'm like, that's.
I didn't know that until I was 15. I had no sisters. So my parents never even thought to teach me that, right? So I mean, but these are things that maybe they didn't think about, or maybe it was just taboo. And I'm kind of leaning more towards they thought it was taboo, and it can't be today.
Yeah. Well, and they're so curious. Like even with the baby stuff, like
that's true.
He was like, "Well, how does the baby come out?" And this was when Letty was being born, so he was 3, 4. So we're just like, "Oh, out of her belly," and that like kind of satisfied him for a little bit. And then I remember we were in the car once and he asked me, he's like, Dad, how do they come out? And I'm like, well, they just come out the belly. He's like, that doesn't make sense. I'm like, all right, you really want to know? And he's like, yeah. I'm like, they come out mom's vagina. And he's just like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Like,
I really think the more normal it is, the more normal it is. And
Yeah,
I will say, I grew up in a household where it wasn't taboo, and I'm so grateful for that. And I do think that helped when it came to like my experience and feeling comfortable telling my parents. And then as far as like, that stuff just never been weird to talk about.
Yeah.
For me, I've always been comfortable with that stuff. But yeah, I definitely think just like normalizing talking about like our bodies, if we talk about them or they're hush hush, then it's like there's like a weird shame around it.
Yeah, exactly.
You know?
I remember watching a panel of professional or just like psychiatrists in the family. Like that's what they do and teach marriage counselors and family counselors, whatever. And they were talking about how a lot of times parents feel like by talking about it, they're giving their kid permission to go and search further. But in reality, the studies show that it actually brings it to a halt because now they know the answer.
Right.
And it's way safer for them to have that than go to Google.
Absolutely.
Go to Google. It's like, woo, or YouTube. Yeah. Or to wonder and then ask their friends. And then it can go crazy
I agree
from
with
there.
that. Yep. Like if we know the answer to something, then we don't usually keep it.
Yeah.
And I feel like we've created that space, and I'm actually like, now that he's getting older and we're seeing that, like I'm proud of that as a parent. Like, okay, we did something.
Yeah.
Especially with our first. But I have an arsenal of books too. Just books that I've been able to use from the time they were little to teach them about it, because as a parent, sometimes you're like, I have no idea where to start.
Yeah.
So books are really helpful, and I can share some of those with you that you can share as well. And there's a
how about we do this? You know, if somebody's watching this and they want to connect with you and they're curious about some of those books, where they find you, your Instagram handle, what's
at Petite and Neat.
So if they want to know those books, just
and I have highlights on it, and you can DM me as well. I think that would be
that'd be awesome. Yeah. Cool. Yeah,
there's a nonprofit called the Mama Bear Effect. That's a really great resource. You can go to their website. They have free resources, books, all sorts of things. We have a magnet on our fridge that's like talks about house rules, like no secrets. That's a big one, no secrets, stuff like that. So that's also a really good resource.
Yeah. And I don't think it's even safe to like as parents be like, well, we're going to be the exception. Didn't happen to me, so like it's not going to happen to my kids. Like it's a different game.
Yeah.
And we have to take this seriously.
I don't know the statistics off the top of my head, but I feel like the last time I read or something, it was like 1 in 4 kids will be sexually abused at some point. Yeah, so we're definitely, there's just you cannot assume it won't happen to you or your kids.
And this is a perfect segue, I feel like, to Marlon, to go into your situation, your story, in your family, because it's the people that we didn't think
100%.
a lot of the time.
It's
people you would never, but you would never think that they would do something like that. So, born and raised in Santa Clara, right?
Yep.
You were born there, raised there.
Yep.
Dad was a school teacher.
Yep.
He was heavily involved at a snack shack down at the baseball field. I remember him as a kid. He had church callings. His dad, your dad's dad, was a patriarch, right, in the church, which is if you're not a member of the LDS church, I would say it's probably like you got your bishop, your stake president. I would almost say like
patriarchs are pretty.
It's higher, right? Like it's a big calling. Yeah. So
usually pretty spiritual people.
Yeah. So I think there's a lot shielded there from your dad, and so if you can just share your story with your dad.
Yeah. So he taught over at Sunset Elementary for 30 years.
He was my teacher.
Long time.
Yeah, so to kind of like tie it together.
Yeah. So it kind of ties together. And when we were talking about like how did people get away with it for so long, so we'll get to that. But yeah, so he taught there for 30 years. I just remember we were having dinner one night, right? Things were pretty good. Things were pretty good in life. But I remember my sister-in-law called me.
You guys are married?
Yeah.
At this point?
Yeah.
This was 2018.
2018, yeah. So end of January 2018. So yeah, I remember my sister-in-law, she calls me up, which she never calls me, so I thought it was kind of weird that she was calling me. So I answered it and she's like, "Hey, what are you doing?" I'm like, "Just eating dinner." She's like, "Hey, your dad just got arrested." And I kind of laughed because I'm like going through my mind, like, what could he have gotten arrested for? Because my dad doesn't, you wouldn't even expect that, but
he wasn't an alcoholic.
No.
He wasn't into drugs.
No.
He wasn't.
My dad, there was never crude jokes.
Never swore.
No, never swore. I remember like the worst thing he'd ever say is like pissed off, which I remember when he'd say that and you're like, whoa, chill it out. Because he never said anything like that. Never dirty jokes. Like, he was never watching.
He was also very
crazy movies or anything.
Non-affectionate person, kind of removed.
Yeah.
Yeah, very removed that way.
If I could give my opinion, because I saw him like, Willy Wonka, at the beginning of Willy Wonka, there's the Candyman.
Yeah.
That was my opinion of your dad.
Yeah.
Like he at the snack shack. He's like, you want the gumballs, you want the, he was the Candyman. Like I always would take my little quarters and then I would go get a couple suckers and I was like, he's so cool.
Yeah. And he was really well known and everybody loved him.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was super awesome. Like as a kid, cause you're like, oh, are you Mr. Payne's son? And it was like instant clout. Like it was awesome. And so, yeah, he ran the Sunset Express the whole time. You sang in it. They were singing all over. Like everyone knew who he was. I think he won Teacher of the Year award or something once. Cause I remember going up to Salt Lake and we went to this dinner.
Wow.
All over Utah. He was very well
known. Very well known. And so, yeah, when my sister-in-law tells me this, I'm like, well, what did he get arrested for? I thought maybe like tickets or something. And she's like, aggravated sexual assault of a child. And I'm like, what does that even mean? Like who? And she's like, I don't know. We don't have a lot of information, but I'm like, are you sure? My dad? I'm like, Curtis? Like, are you sure? And she's like, yeah. And I was like, all right. So I remember we all kind of got together that night, tried to figure out what's going on, called the lawyer. So that was on a Tuesday. The next day, my mom and grandma went and bailed him out. So he comes home. I didn't get to see him till Sunday. I think it was Sunday, right?
Over there for dinner.
Yeah, it was Super Bowl Sunday. So I remember going over there. He was pretty somber, just kind of like didn't say a whole lot. And I remember asking my mom and my brother. My brother and his wife and kids lived there at the time. And I'm like, was he even like? Has he said anything? And they're just like, hasn't said much. Pretty much has just sat there and cried all week. So that was like kind of weird. And then so I talked to him Sunday. And then the following Tuesday, gets rearrested. My brother calls me, hey, he got rearrested. There's like 8 more charges against him. So, and we all thought like, on the first one when he got arrested, it was, I think, a girl from like 20 years prior was the one that kind of like, I guess she saw him at, he did some event that she saw him at and was like, why is this guy still teaching school? And so she immediately went and called the police. They did an investigation. It was like 2, 3, 4 week investigation. Felt like they had enough to arrest him, so in my mind, I'm like, okay, it's one girl probably trying to find some money, sue the school district, whatever.
We thought it was a fluke for sure.
And like, even if there's like 1 or 2, I'm like, I don't know. So then the next Tuesday he gets rearrested. 8 more charges. I think there was 3 or 4 more girls. So they put out a tip line. And so people started calling in on that. And so that was kind of like, okay, what's like really happening? And I mean, he wouldn't say anything.
Your mom did ask him once, and he said, I don't remember any of this. That was his response.
Yeah, I don't remember. Some like guilty people say that, but so yeah, that was really like, I don't know. It was that week. It's pretty hard. And then I remember, I don't know if it was how many days after the second arrest, but we had a really good friend.
Pretty recent.
Yeah, pretty good family friends, which we hadn't heard from at all, which my little brother and their sister were super tight, super good friends. And Cherish had made comments before. There was, looking back, like through this lens that we have, there was weird stuff that did happen, but at the time, like.
But I always had.
Yeah, she always asked.
I didn't know what, but I always felt like something wasn't right.
Yeah. And so my buddy calls me and he's like, hey, how are you? And I'm like, oh, good. And he's like, well, what do you think about all this? And can we swear on here?
Yeah.
No, but I just told him, like, I think it's bullshit. Like, I think it's just a couple girls trying to get money. And he's like, I don't think so. And I'm like, well, why? What do you know? I'm like, here, I haven't heard from you in a week, 2 weeks. He's like, well, I know someone, like, I think it's legit. And I'm like, well, like, just tell me. And I mean, deep down, I knew exactly what he was going to say, but he's just like, oh man. And like, he struggled and he's like, dude, like, one of them's my sister. And I'm like, shit. Like deep down, I knew it was coming, but I needed him to say it.
Yeah.
And we were super good friends. Like his sister, like I saw her pretty consistently. Like we had talked quite a bit. Like we were friends, and so I'm like, I know she's not making it up.
Yeah.
I know, like
she had no.
There's just no reason to.
Yeah.
Because she was never a student of my dad's. This happened off campus. It wasn't part of the school stuff. So that threw me for a loop. And man, it was just like the next like week or so was super rough that way. Like, is this even true? Like what do you even think? Like, here's someone your whole life that hasn't done anything wrong his entire life. And then he's accused of like one of the worst things, I think. I mean, murder's obviously probably the worst, but I put this almost like anything with kids, like it's pretty close.
Right.
And so you just go through this, like, is it true? Did he really do it? And then I'm like, well, I know this other girl and I know her really well too. And there's just no reason to lie.
But her stories added up as well.
But yeah, like there was so many weird little things where I'm like, okay, well that makes sense. If he really did do this, like, well, it's no wonder you weren't invited to things and different, like the separation from her and my brother, like it was really abrupt. And I think it really hurt my brother because they were best friends growing up, and just all of a sudden, like, never really saw her after that. And then, yeah, so that was.
Did you feel like you had a good enough relationship with your dad where you could go and ask him at that time?
No,
How do you explain it?
So it was a really weird relationship looking back. Well, and I knew it was weird at one point, like, so one thing I've never heard from my dad until I left on my mission. So I'm 19 in the MTC. Never heard I love you until that day.
Wow.
Probably like that was the only time I really remember a hug. So it was never like, we never went to my dad for anything. We always went to my mom. My mom did a lot.
She was the emotional support.
Yeah, totally. Like she was everything support.
It's weird. Okay, so from the outside, because when we first got married, I was always like, why don't your parents like hug, like say I love, like I thought that was weird, and it's like that's just how they are. I was like just kind of old school. I thought that was weird. Like, and
you're like, Marlon, are you that way?
Yeah, no.
Oh, totally. Yeah,
I grilled him when we were getting married.
Yeah,
like I was like, you'll hug our kids. Like
you'll
say I love you to our kids. Like I think that stuff's really important. You know, I just thought it was an odd dynamic is the best way to explain it. Yeah, and I think even from people looking outside, everyone that knew him like thought of him so highly and just so like friendly and kind. But like at home, he wasn't like mean, like you said.
Yeah, no,
he was kind of disconnected. Like just disconnected is the best way to put it. Not the family man that everybody thought he was.
Yeah,
if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
I always say he was a great provider.
Yeah,
not necessarily a great spouse or father.
Right.
But he also wasn't a bad one. So that's what's weird about it, and that people don't understand. Yeah, it was a weird dynamic.
Very weird that way.
Yeah, that is interesting. And when we're talking about disconnected, and as a father and a family, and then he's quiet about it, and they're not affectionate and everything. I want to be careful with this one, so let's be careful with it because I don't want to like say like, every time this happens, right. Okay, but I think we've talked about a little bit with your dad and pornography.
Yeah.
And how, what's your take on that as far as that affecting your dad? I think you said you found some stuff on his computer.
Yeah. So after he was arrested, we went and got his phone. And his iPad. So he did a really, and this is weird too, like everything. I mean, he had his email on like auto delete. Everything was pretty much clean. Except there were some videos left, I think, in one of the cookies or cache that I went in and found. So there was porn on his phone. I think my sister-in-law found something on his iPad. So that just confirmed to us, like,
that was a part of it.
Yeah. And, porn, at least in my mind, but if you talk to anyone, it's a progression. I don't think anyone starts... Very first time they look at porn, it's
got to be rare.
Hardcore pornography, right? Most of the time, it starts with pictures, and it progresses, right?
And that's another one. Like, not necessarily everyone that looks at
porn
is gonna.
Yeah.
But in this case, for whatever reason, we knew that had to be part of his story.
Every pedophile is addicted to porn.
That's true.
I would bet my entire life savings that there's not one who's not addicted to porn and just enjoys that.
Yeah, how could you? In my mind, and again, like my whole being careful with is I don't want anybody listening to this think I have a porn problem, so that means I'm going to have this problem.
Right? No, that's not.
It's not what we're saying. That. And the other thing is like, hey, you have a porn problem. Okay, well, I think the more important thing that I want to put out there is just like, hey, don't hide it.
I agree with that.
It's okay that you like to see naked people and that you're attracted to that, but hey, it doesn't serve you. And it won't serve you, and it could take you down a path that you don't want to go, so why risk it? It's just a bombshell. And so it's not doing you any good. It's a sedation.
I agree.
Yep.
You're running from reality, which you can then compare it to alcohol or drugs or whatever, right, in that sense?
I agree.
And so let's just call it what it is. I think women need to have, and this is hard to say, and then you just go with me here. I'm not saying this is like eternal truth or anything. I think women have to have a healthier sense of this is out there. And yes, my husband could look at it. And yes, we can work through it.
I agree.
And I think guys have to look at it as like, okay, yeah, I get that I'm wired this way and sometimes it could happen, but let's talk about it. Because I kind of have this belief that if your dad would have done that early on, as hard as that conversation may or could have been throughout his marriage, if he continued to struggle with it, it could have potentially saved it.
Your mom said that. She's like, when it first happened, his mom was like, I'll stand by you. Like originally, that first arrest. And then the second arrest came, and then the information about the family friend came out. And that's really when it became real for everyone, especially his mom. and kind of sealed the deal, like, this is real. And she told him and she told us, I told him, if he had come to me 25 years ago and said, I have this porn problem or this, I'm struggling with this attraction, she said, I would have worked with him. I would have stayed there. I would have helped him. We would have gotten help. He never did that. And one thing about the child thing is, like, we don't know. We tried to ask him if something happened to him when he was younger, because that's a common thing.
Passes on.
Mm-hmm. Hurt people.
Or like the attraction to kids with him, if it was, he was a teacher. So like maybe it didn't start that way, but being around them and having who knows? We don't really know what happened because he's never, ever been open about it. Yeah. But yeah, I think talking about things from the very beginning, like, I think it could have changed the whole trajectory of this story.
One of the things I say all the time, and trauma is either transformed or it's transmitted. And so you can either...
I've never heard that. And I love that.
It's one or the other. Because
I feel like, not to toot my own horn, but I feel like I used what happened to me for good.
Transformed it.
Yeah, I've never thought of it that way, but I really do. I feel like it made me who I am.
Right.
And not to say that I'm glad it happened or I would choose it or wish it upon anyone, but I think a lot of my life choices and the things I've done and the choices I made are because of what happened to me.
Yeah.
And for the better.
Yep.
Well, and I think even with my dad's stuff, I mean,
yeah,
like now, like as a father, I'm like, I don't want to be like him. So there's a lot of things that's like just laying in bed with my kids when I'm putting them to bed. It's like my dad never did that. Yeah. So there's like all these things. And I think that's what's hard. It's like you then kind of project yourself into his shoes and you're like, why didn't he do those things? And then it just makes me like, I don't want to do what he did. So I like your word, transform and do something different. Do what I wanted.
Just as a dad.
I guess, as a dad.
Obviously not the terrible things he did, but you see that now, the lack of fathering that was there that you didn't maybe see growing up. And now you're the opposite. And I always tell you that I'm really proud of the dad you are.
Thanks, man. But
cut that one. That one's gonna be a reel. You guys should kiss now. And then I'm just kidding.
But yeah, so to continue with that story though, so he got arrested the second time, and I think from there, like me and my brother would go to all the hearings. We got pulled aside once by the prosecutor. So Cherish was with us one time, and he pulled us aside and he's like, "How are you guys involved?" I think he thought she was a victim, and I was like, "Yo, well, we're her or his kids," and he's like, "Oh," it's like, "Come here." So he brought us in and just kind of laid it out like, hey, we have, what did he say? Like dozens of girls that are willing to testify all over the US. They're willing to fly here. Like, he's like, not to like be hardcore, but he's like, we're going full born, like no plea deals, nothing. We're going after him. And we're like, great. That's what we want. And he's like, oh, okay. Like,
say he knows us and your mom.
Yeah.
He was very aware of his mom.
Yeah.
A lot of.
Well, that's right. He was a neighbor, wasn't he?
Or no, he was just the prosecutor.
His dad's lawyer was a neighbor.
Oh, that's what it was.
But even he also met with us at one point and was pretty like.
Yeah, he was pretty blunt. It's like, your dad.
He's in trouble.
Yeah.
Pretty much no chance. He's like, soon as one girl gets up there, he's like, one or two, okay, we could fight that. But he's like, you're going to have one and then two.
After another.
And it's just going to keep going. He's like, no jury's ever going to.
Though, like, with the prosecutor pulling us aside was a lot of people would, when we'd come to the hearings or like they didn't know, were we there supporting him? And we always had to clarify, like, no, we're here to know what's going on because he doesn't tell us anything.
Yeah. And because the lawyer is my dad's lawyer, he's not our lawyer.
He can't tell us much.
So like we were kind of left in the dark other than we'd go to hearings to try and figure out what was going on. But yeah, we did that. It was for a year, I think, by the time it actually got to sentencing. He did take a plea deal, which was actually super awesome. So it was the Tuesday. Everything happens on a Tuesday. So Tuesday before trial. So his trial was going to be the following Tuesday. So that night, finally, he took a plea deal. So my mom, so URS has a Utah retirement. So his retirement. So they forced him to quit. He had a 30 and a half years. So he was able to pull his retirement. So my mom was getting that. However, they have a thing in there that says, well, if anything happened on school grounds, well, we'll backdate that pension so you'll lose that, which was 20 years.
It was like if you're charged with a felony. Right?
Yeah, charged with a felony on school grounds.
Your pension, basically.
So she would have basically lost pretty much the whole pension. So super cool thing is every single one of the girls, that all the victims, they all had to agree on the plea deal, and they did it for my mom, which was super cool.
Yeah, that was really cool.
So they were able to take the family friend because it didn't happen on school grounds. They put all the charges on her, dropped the rest of them, and then he was convicted on that. So he got 60 years, which he was 59, I think, at the time.
So it's over at that point.
Yeah, so it's a life sentence for him. I had something I was going to tell you, but I can't remember now.
He's in Beaver.
He's up in Salt Lake. So
Salt Lake.
Beaver.
I swear,
Yeah.
isn't there Beaver? Penguin?
Gunnison. He was in Gunnison.
Okay.
They moved him to Salt Lake. He actually
got
stage 4 lung cancer. So he's
just wild.
Really
bizarre. Yeah.
Just recently. Like this is very recent.
Within the last 5 months, and pretty much they've given him any time. So which in our mind it's closure, and I think a lot of it's caused by guilt and shame. So
the weight.
Yeah. Because he's never smoked a day in his life, or and there's a thing called the downwinders here, but my mom's like, no, he wasn't here when all that was happening. Doesn't run in the family or anything.
Yeah. So
here's something I got to ask.
Okay.
This is something that I struggle with. Not personally, but the thought. So all right. I have a lot of friends that have struggled with alcohol. That's not my thing. But it feels like it's kind of easy for a lot of people to talk about it in some ways. Like, it's kind of shame-based, whatever, but I drink. Yeah, I drink. I'm a drinker, and I get a little, I just can't stop, right? Drugs.
Same thing.
Hard to hide. Yeah. People kind of have to own up to it a little bit. This stuff's in secret. Like you can be heavy into porn and nobody knows. Like you could literally, somebody walks in the room and you can switch like that, and you can like they might feel like whoa, but like you can totally like handle it, right? But people can still, and they're getting better. I think it coming out and talking about, hey, I have this porn problem, I want to get it better, whatever. But I think that's even harder on the scale. I'm just saying, like I find that it seems like guys. And then think about girls. Like girls, I've heard have a big problem with it on a large scale, but they're not supposed to. So I'm thinking, if I'm a female, how hard is that? True. Because it's not like you don't think it's common, even though it is. Yeah. I've been told statistically. Okay, but then let's talk about pedophilia. You get to the point where it's like, I have this attraction to kids. How do you talk about that? You know what I'm saying? Like, how do you help those people?
I don't know. That's
I guess I don't have the right answer to that, because if it were me, like, how do you tell someone that? That's so, it's perverted, but it's like,
it's so far down. Coming out and saying I'm gay is hard in Utah. Yeah. Coming out and saying I want a sex change is hard. Yeah. Coming out and saying, any of those things. Pedophilia, to me, it just like tops it.
I agree.
How do you talk about it? But if you're able to, before you act out on it,
I think that's the
key. You can get help.
Well, because
maybe you have acted out on it once. I agree. Maybe you did act out on it. Think of all the like all this. You could go to jail and all this. All these things that could come as a consequence. But if you do talk about it and you fix it, you can actually have a life.
Yep.
And it's like at some point. And I don't know if it's even going to be in our generation. It's probably just got to be talked about.
Right.
So one of the biggest things I learned. So after my dad got arrested, there was so many people that would reach out. I had a good buddy of mine. He's like, "You're the second person that I've ever told, but I was abused when I was a kid." And I'm like, "Well, where's that guy? Or the guy that abused you?" I can't remember what he said, but I'm like, you need to go talk about it. Go tell somebody about it, because it's just going to eat you. And I think the biggest thing for us, like we talked about it from day he got arrested, like people kind of tiptoe around and they would want to ask. And
still people.
Yeah. I remember one of my friends, I'm like, if you want to know, just ask. Like, I'm an open book. And she's like, okay. And then she asked a whole bunch of questions, which I'm like, it needs to be talked about because all these things, they happen in the dark, right? The only way to get rid of darkness is to shine a light on it. And I think that's what the Me Too movement started doing, which it was good, but I feel like it kind of got commandeered by people wanting attention. But I mean, I had one of my good friends tell me, I had another good friend of mine that said, which I thought this was really interesting. And this kind of goes back to why do people wait so long? But he's like, there was one day, and this was, he was probably 22 or 3. I can't remember what he told me, but he's like, I woke up one day and had all these memories. He's like, I had suppressed things for so long, but I woke up, had all these memories of what happened. And I said the same thing to him. I'm like, well, where's that guy that did it? He's like, well, I think he was a cousin or an uncle, or he was some sort of family member. He's like, well, I talked to his mom about it and told her, but I'm like,
the suppressing thing though, that's a big deal because naturally your brain tries to protect us from trauma. So like fight or flight. So it's actually pretty common for this to happen to someone, especially as a child, and they kind of suppress those memories and forget. Yeah. And a lot of times
them get threatened. They get shamed by whoever their abuser is.
Well, there's a lot of people that'll go, and ayahuasca is becoming more popular, but like plant-based medicine or, all these things that like give you a spiritual experience that they didn't even know. And then they go and do some of those things. Some of it's legal, some of it's not, but then it just, you have memories. Yeah. Ketamine is more legal. A lot of times, it's legal. Yeah.
It will manifest itself though as other problems, like PTSD, anxiety, depression, mental health issues,
drugs.
Because you're like burying it. And so
even
just getting it out, can make a huge difference.
Well,
go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say, so our family friend too, like a lot of them think that it's only them.
That's true. She did.
She was like, I thought I was the only one. I loved your family, didn't want to blow you up. So she's like, I just removed myself from the situation. And that went on. I mean, I think the abuse with her went on for a few years before she finally did. But that's the hardest thing. And like, I'm really glad for I don't even remember her name, which doesn't matter, but the girl that initially started the whole thing, like it was 20 years from the time it happened to her when she was in 4th grade. Yeah. So she was, I think, had a kid or two by that point. But if she wouldn't have said anything, like none of this would have happened because it was her. And then the police opened up a tip line and they had hundreds tips. Like we went and got the grammar report, which is the police report. It was about 90 or 100 pages long. And this is where things get super frustrating, at least in my mind. Like, so, I mean, there were these girls over 20 years. So there was some, like, I think within a year or two of him getting arrested that came forward, there was dozens of them, right? None of them knew each other. It wasn't like there was just this one little group of girls that was like, we're going to say this happened. Like
Which
it was
what we thought initially. Yeah. We really did.
Right.
So it was like this 20-year span. And so I remember reading this police report and like every story is the same, like how it happened. And then the frustrating part is he had 5 different warnings from the school district.
Yeah.
So the very first girl did report it. And then I think,
she redacted the statement because she was scared.
And then I know another girl did, and actually the police got involved. They're like, well, there's really no evidence other than this girl. We know Curtis, he's a great guy, and kind of shut it down.
Your mom never knew about any of this. He was investigated a couple of times.
He had literally 5. I read them. There was 5 letters.
No idea.
In the school district.
Somehow he hid it.
He hid it.
Wow.
Other people knew about it.
Yeah.
There was when he first got arrested, actually a friend of ours reached out that has known his dad for years.
I think she must have worked. Did she work at the school?
I think so. And she was like, oh my gosh, we love Curtis. His name's been cleared once. We're hoping it's cleared again. And I was like,
Yeah, we're like, what are you talking about?
So I was like, what do you mean? And she was like, yeah, when this came out years ago, he was cleared. And we were like,
no idea.
He kept it from, he hid it really well and no one talked about it. And that's what's bizarre to me. I'm like, so people knew that even lived around his family, that were in their ward even, that he'd been investigated before, but none of his family or his mom never caught wind, and he never talked to his wife about it or anything. Yeah. Because no one talked about it. No. And I think that's what you're getting at. It's just talking about your problems and things. Yeah.
And I think it has to be, and a lot of people, I think they feel ashamed that it happened to them. And it's like, it's not your fault. Especially if you were a kid. Like, what are you going to do? Like, you can't do anything. You can't overpower an adult, but you can go tell somebody.
Well, kids are submissive. Like, for me, I was like, okay.
Right.
Sure. What am I supposed to do?
And I think as adults, too, sometimes we think, like, we need to listen to them. Because most of the time, kids don't lie for no reason, especially something like that. It's like, how are they going to know any different unless it actually happened to them? Yeah. And so, it was just eye-opening to me that it's all over the place. Like, I've had so many people reach out, but they haven't told anyone. I've had
just in the
a bunch of people tell me, like, you're the only person I've told about it. And I'm like, go tell someone. Go talk to someone about it.
Yeah.
Like, go to the police and open up a case against whoever it was. Even if they don't get arrested, at least it has something there. So if somebody else eventually sometime comes along and says, hey, this happened to me too, they're like, oh, somebody else reported this. But I'm like, usually it only takes one person and it'll open it up. Like in my dad's case, it was one girl and then, dude, just floodgates. Yeah. Which that's all they need sometimes is just one person to step up and do it.
Yep.
But I'm like, if people would and not wait, like it wouldn't be as big of a problem because people generally, at least predators, pedophiles, I mean, they're not going to do it if they know. If you watch interviews with them and stuff, usually they try and find the weakest ones where the parents aren't involved, where they have, like, they're lonely and, you know, they know that they can control them. They're not going to go after the strong ones, the people that, or the kids that are talking about it or loud about it. They're not going to go after them.
Well, that was the one. So I talked to you about Lacey Bergeson was on the podcast, and she said one thing that actually did really well as a reel, and we were talking about this topic, and she said that she was reading a study where it talked about how if there was a strong male presence in the home, that was the biggest deterrent from somebody else going and preying on those kids in that family. And so to me, that struck me really hard. Like, that's my role, and how am I showing up as a dad, and how am I showing up? And it's crazy, but like, how am I showing up in my fitness, in my faith, in my finances, with my wife? Like, how am I showing up as a guy in all areas of life to be the best version of me, to where somebody else goes, I ain't going to mess with that guy because he's bad A. I'm not going to mess with that dude. And I'm not going to mess with his kids because he's going to freaking take me down. And I don't have to be tatted up, and I don't have to be roided out, and I don't have to be like, that kind of guy, but be a man. And I think that.
Be present.
Yeah. Be present with your kids and let people know. Like, I think we got to do better as guys too. And a lot of this does, and we're talking about male specific. I don't know numbers, guys, but I would think that males are probably more driven to do it. There's women.
There's some women, but it's super rare and low for a woman to be involved. Yeah. Which is sad. And I mean, the hardest thing now, it's like, and I think, like, if you look at Tim Ballard and stuff, they've shown a huge light on trafficking, right? Yeah. Which is awesome, and it's really needed, but I mean, abuse happens usually within the family. Like, statistically, it's usually an uncle, grandpa, dad, cousin. Neighbor. Typically.
In both these cases,
Well, school teacher too. But that's what's crazy, and so it's like, I don't know, you don't want to assume people are doing that. Yeah. But like,
because then it goes back to the fear thing, right?
Yeah. I mean,
and just to touch on that, I hope you're okay with me talking about it. But after it happened, Marlon kind of started to let that eat at him and got like overly protective of our kids and didn't want our kids to go here or there or felt weird about this or that. And that was hard because I'm like, I want you to trust your gut because I think that's really important as a parent. But also I think sometimes you're driven by fear, right? Because he was like, man, the person that I grew up with that raised me and lived in my home for 35 years or whatever. I didn't live there 35 years. Right. But whatever.
Just kidding.
Thank goodness.
Was doing it and I had no idea, you know? And that was a hard conversation because I was like, I don't feel the same as you and we have to be on the same page as parents.
Yeah. Right.
And I told him, I was like, I think you need to go talk to a therapist.
Therapy's good.
This whole thing is very traumatic and I think you're kind of being controlled by fear right now and I just think you need to talk to a therapist and like kind of learn how to sort out your feelings because for me I'm like if I lived in fear of all the things as a mom I would never let my kids do anything. Mm-hmm. I would never let them go anywhere or whatever and I think that was really big, him going to therapy and kind of learning to discern those feelings and
Well, I love that because you're focusing on what you can control. There is a level of you can't control a certain amount. You can't control where your kids are at all the time.
I really think it goes back to education.
That's what I'm saying.
With you too.
It's right on.
Educating your kids and as a parent being educated.
Yes.
Because I think it's one of those things people just like push to the back of their mind or think won't happen to them or it's just not a priority and it has to be.
And that's why I'm so glad we're having this conversation, this podcast right now, because, you know, I think there's been heights, like big pushes with Tim Ballard comes out with something, everybody's thinking about it again, but it's like, we always need reminders of those things. It is so prevalent.
There should be conversations in your home that you have regularly.
Yeah.
Just like conversations about, and I don't know if this is something people talk about, but I'll talk to my kids really regularly and very nonchalantly, just while we're making breakfast. Like, hey, you know, if anyone ever asks to look at your privates, like, what do you do? And they know their response, you know, and I hope I prepared them so that if it ever happens, but they know what to say, or even like the kidnapping thing, you know, if someone says, hey, little girl, come get some candy. Right. It's the same thing, which we also should be having those conversations. Yeah. But your child is way more likely to be sexually abused than kidnapped, per se. So it's one of those things that as a parent, our job, I think, is to teach and protect our children.
Yeah, I think it's so easy to talk about Jesus in your homes with your kids. I think it's so easy to talk about like finances and like it's easy to talk about like kidnappings. But then we talk about like, hey, the birds and the bees talk. Like it's one talk. Like you're one time and then your kids are just going to get it, right? I've heard it said before that it needs to be a topic in your home just as frequent as all of the other things I just mentioned. And it needs to be ongoing.
All the time.
Yeah. They're not just going to get it all of a sudden.
No, they're learning. And I think a lot of it goes back to parents. Like we have to learn too. We have to be willing to know our stuff and look into it and bring it up and have it as a topic in your home that you discuss regularly. Yeah. So your kids know. Super good. They know what to do when it happens or if it happens, and they feel comfortable coming to you because that's a huge part. Yep.
In all things. This has been a great episode. I really feel like there's things in here that people need to hear. Guys, if you feel like you got stuff out of this, which I think you did and you should, go share it with other people. Like we need to be able to educate people with this. We're going to share some reels on it, obviously, share those. But thank you guys for coming on, being vulnerable, talking about some stuff that a lot of people don't want to talk about, but you guys are just so like great examples of being open and able to talk about it. And it's not a big deal.
Have to be.
And you need to. So thank you again for doing that.
Yep.
Okay, guys, we'll see you in the next one. Thanks for listening this long. And then if you haven't left a 5-star review yet, go do that. If you want to leave a 4-star review, just like keep going on. Don't do that. Just 5-star only. And we'll see you in the next one.